Richard, last night when you read in your book, to my mind, I felt something like a mission against religion, against gurus and so on. Isn't there a contradiction to freedom?
Yeah.
I mean, it's some kind of duality as well.
Yeah.
If I am against.
Yeah. There would be if there was a mission here in a way. Well, I don't know whether there would be because anything can arise, but there isn't a mission. I mean, it can sound. I know it can sound like that. No, I just sat down. I was encouraged to write it, as I said last night. Explained about that last night. Just sat down and turned out to be something I enjoyed doing. I mean, if you like, you could say, I enjoy sort of the English phrase, railing against religion. I mean, you know the phrase. I mean, I'm using it because it's deliberate. Because it's a strong phrase that you're saying. I enjoy that. I find it fun. So, I'm not on a mission. There is no mission in that book. Will that book overthrow Catholicism throughout the world? No, I don't think so. Really, I mean, really at the deepest core, it just amuses me to deal with these things.
Do you sometimes use the word innocence? Innocence?
What about innocence?
Is that also, do you sometimes use that word? It just, for me, listening, it just feels this sense of sort of innocence, of openness without any purpose.
Yeah, I think that's part of the freedom, isn't it? That something of the wind of freedom or the breath of freedom blowing the light, and that's part of the freedom, is the recognition that there is no purpose. What a wonderful freedom to be. Such a lot of baggage to carry, particularly, that sense of, the mind has of purpose, overwhelming metaphysical purpose, even very burdensome. So it's part of the freedom. The kind of, the bird song, now the flowers, the leaves and the flowers on that tree, buds blowing in the wind. I mean, that is it. I mean, in a way, innocence is quite a good word, isn't it? Perhaps. Yeah. And the recognition that, anything can arise, everything might arise, anything can arise in that. And going back to your question, like a kind of about the church might arise in that. Yeah. Why not? Yeah.
The word innocence brings another expression into my mind. I think I've read several times in Tony Parsons' books, I'm not sure whether in your books as well, that's the expression of, or the words, unconditioned love.
Yes.
Which is a very attractive perception for me.
Yeah, of course.
As long as I'm near the person.
Yeah.
Can you say something about that?
Yes, I can. Probably at great length. I like the phrase. I use it myself. I mean, it is just words, obviously. Anyone doesn't like those words, they could find other words. But my way of putting it, something that we haven't talked, I've talked about a lot before and written about, but we haven't talked about so far this afternoon, is that this all sounds, I almost feel embarrassed to describe it because it sounds so much like a story, because it is a story in a way, because the mind is telling it, using words about events which apparently happen, but you know, just ignoring all that. What can often happen is there can be, let's call it, making this even more ridiculous, two phases to the seeing of non-duality, which is what I'm talking about. It can be like this, doesn't have to be. And one phase is what is sometimes described, not just by me but by others as well, as seeing emptiness. And one phase, I feel embarrassed using this language, but never mind, is seeing emptiness and fullness. So first in the story time there is the seeing of emptiness, then there can be the seeing of fullness. But the seeing of fullness includes the seeing of emptiness. It sounds paradoxical, but it isn't. And Nisargadatta talks about this. If I can remember the quote, I've written it, I have acknowledged it as his in at least one of my books. I haven't used it for a long time. It's something like, seeing nothing is wisdom, seeing everything is love. So now we're working round to the question, what you said about unconditional love. So initially there can just be the seeing that everything is empty. I can't explain it, I can't describe it any better than that, but that's a phrase that fits. This is empty and that is empty, therefore there is no this and that. Because if all there is emptiness, then this and that kind of disappear. Okay? This can seem incredible, this might just be a momentary seeing, and it can seem incredibly attractive. Maybe for reasons I won't labour here. It's like, it could be a huge shock. It could be sort of like, what the hell's going on? But it can also be a real wow, like, wow. You know, and I'm neither a Buddhist nor a student of Buddhism, but like many people, I dabble. And you know, I'd say, you know, Buddhists are very good at describing this, describing emptiness. It's like empty phenomena floating by or whatever, like clouds across the sky. Actually, that's not a very good analogy because clouds aren't empty, as we well know when we go out without our umbrellas, but never mind. Emptiness, this phenomenon, like images arising on a cinema screen, but without any emotional investment that we might have with a film, or another analogy, modern analogy that sometimes is metaphor, is a hologram. Everything suddenly seems like a hologram, where it seems solid and yet it's known that it's not. Yeah, so that can be a kind of first initial seeing. And Nisargadatta, stage by stage, Nisargadatta says seeing, so that could be described as seeing I am nothing. It's not necessarily the way I describe it, but as I'm quoting Nisargadatta, I will stick to what he said without being critical of that phraseology. Seeing, so what could he possibly mean? That seeing that this is nothing and that is nothing, seeing I am nothing, is wisdom. Well, what can happen, tends to happen, maybe doesn't have to happen, is that in that seeing, vast amounts of our conditioning can just disappear. It can be a real shock. Like, so huge amounts of conditioning, vast numbers of assumptions that I have held unquestioningly about life. You know, since I was old enough to be conscious but still very young. Maybe, you know, when do I start being indoctrinated by my parents? I mean, as some of the very aggressive atheists write, you know, no baby is born a Catholic baby or a Muslim baby or a Buddhist baby or a Hindu baby. So at what age do I start? You know, I'm born as a baby. At what age do I start to turn into a Hindu baby or a Buddhist baby? You know, quite young. In other words, pretty young, language and thought develops and the indoctrination's already started and so forth. So by this, I mean, let's say that moment of seeing happens in the biography, the biographical story of a person at, say, the age of 35. There's a hell of a lot of conditioning has happened by then. And I mean, some of it's very subtle. It's not all that kind of very overt like perhaps religious conditioning, all sorts of conditioning. That is likely, all of that could just drop away in that split second of seeing emptiness. Right? So suddenly, all of these conditioned stories, because they are just stories, gone. So that's a kind of wisdom. It's not that anything has been gained, it's that something's been lost. So in a way, it's not that wisdom has been gained, it's that, and I'm using a deliberately aggressive word here, if you like, because it's the one that popped into my head, so I'll stick with it. It's not that wisdom is gained, it's that stupidity is lost. A slightly kinder word would be, it's not that wisdom is gained, it's that folly is lost. Split second, and it can be very, very disorientating and very upsetting. You know, I mean, if I've been, if I've followed a very rigid religious path, for example, it'd be very upsetting. So that's the seeing of nothing. This Siddhartha says it can be the start of wisdom, right? And the one for whom that seeing has happened, it can seem like, well, that's complete. Oh, that's it. That's what I've been searching for all my life, and perhaps it'll come back, right? What often happens is that there can then be, let's call it a further seeing, if you'll, pardon the story-like language, but we have to use it, in which the emptiness of everything is seen again. So this is empty and that is empty, and therefore there's the same thing, but with one difference this time. And it has to sound like a paradox that this is not just empty, but it's also full. There is a fullness to it, which is so full it couldn't possibly be any fuller. And we could seek hopelessly and helplessly to find a way of describing that fullness, and we can come up with whatever phrase or word works for us, and it doesn't matter. But you quoted Tony, didn't you? I think. Did you quote Tony?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So for Tony, unconditional love, that fits it best for me, it fits it best for lots of other speakers and writers about this, and then some others will use a different term. Seeing the mind of God, maybe, for example. And then it's really all over. Then it really is all over. Whatever happens after that is just stuff happening, because there isn't anything else to see. So, going back to Nisargadatta, emptiness is seen, seeing I am nothing is wisdom in the way we've discussed. I've discussed anyway, seeing I am everything. And again, I could be picky and say, well, that's not the way I put it, but it's fine, it'll do, it's fine. Seeing what I would say is seeing there is only everything, because I'm not there. But seeing I'm everything is absolutely fine as well, is love, because in that it's seeing that this is not only empty, it's also full. Call what it's full of whatever you like, but love's as good as any. And then it's the unconditionality, which is in a way both so wonderful and so shocking. And it's kind of, for a mind, it's not possible to experience unconditional love. And one of the reasons that certain sort of spiritual paths, spiritual practices, maybe not so much those more kind of moralising and moralistic paths, can be such a pain in the arse and can do us, can kind of give us such a headache, just because of the suggestion that you can, and me, that we not only can, but should become unconditionally loving. That's our goal. And believe me, this is a goal that you will fail at 100 times every day. So if we have a nicely masochistic character, and if we've been brought up in a religious story, we might, then we will never be short of something to beat ourselves up about. Today I failed 127 times to be unconditionally loving. Tomorrow I will try harder. So part of the shock in this, let's call it second seeing, as it often is, part of the shock is this sudden recognition that unconditional love is simply the case. It doesn't have anything to do with me. I don't exist after all, so how can it have anything to do with me? It doesn't have anything to do with anything I thought or believed I was, or indeed anything to do with anything that I think or believe now that I am, because that stories could still go on, that's perfectly possible. That's part of the shock, the recognition that unconditional love is simply the case. It's not something I have to work to produce in myself, and indeed it isn't something that I can work to produce in myself. Now, not for everybody by any means, but for some people who have made themselves thoroughly morally constipated by seeking to better themselves in this way and becoming more and more tense with every failure, that can just be the most wonderful relief and release. And again, we're back to what I've said several times this afternoon, freedom. The freedom of seeing that unconditional love is the case. I don't have to purify myself to see it. I can't purify myself to see it. I don't have to earn it. You know, it's not conferred upon me as a reward for good works. It doesn't have anything to do with me. It doesn't have anything to do with what I think is happening. It is simply the case. It's simply, if you like, slightly misleading phrase, it's simply the nature of existence. You see? So, going back to Nisargadatta, nothing is seen, lots of conditioning is likely to be destroyed, so there's more wisdom because there's less folly. And then the seeing that this is not just empty, but it's also full, that's full, this is full, so there is no this and that, and it's love. Seeing I know everything is love. There's no way the mind can be unconditionally loving. I mean, if you think about, the real challenge about unconditional love, just think about, this is a kind of hypothetical sort of philosophical sort of question. I'm not expecting anybody to actually do it, but you might be able to do it. Just think of the thing you most hate in the world, whatever that is, right? Now, that is embraced by unconditional love.
Unconditioned hate.
Yeah, but we'll come back to that if you like. Somebody raised that in another talk. But the thing that you most hate in the world is embraced by unconditional love, because otherwise it wouldn't be unconditional. Because the unconditional actually means what it says. So if there is one thing that isn't contained within unconditional love, it's not unconditional, it's conditional. Just one thing. You just have to exclude one thing that's over there. You say, well, love is conditional on it not being that thing. The mind just can't. The mind can kind of pretend to be all accepting in that way, and it can give itself a kind of terrible indigestion and maybe even a hernia. You know, the struggle of trying, oh God, I've got to be more loving. No. It's just, love is just the case. It doesn't have anything to do with anything you think you are or I think I am. Or anything that's going on. This is a real affront to the mind. What do you mean it's not? It doesn't have anything to do with anything that's going on. Are you mad to say that? Well, yeah, I suppose so. This is a kind of madness. To the mind, this is a kind of madness. Yeah, it's the only real sanity, but to the mind, because the mind is mad, the mind sees its insanity as sane, because it sees its insanity as normal. But what we're talking about here, when the mind is overthrown, is the only real sanity. Yeah. So I'm very happy to go along with, you quoted Tony, I'm quoting Nisargadatta, many other writers, speakers we could quote using the same phrase, yeah. I was challenged once at this point, I think it was in London, when I said that, the mind, if you like, the person, the individual, cannot be unconditionally loving, and somebody shouted out in the back, what about a parent's love for their child? Isn't that unconditional? And before before I got a chance to answer it, somebody else gave a much better answer than I would have given. Somebody else just said, well, of course it's conditional. It's conditional on them being your child. You know, how can we, you know? We have very, very bizarre, the mind comes up with very, very bizarre ideas about unconditional love. Actually, this has given me the chance to throw in a little anecdote that I forgot to put in last night because I wanted to. I actually do go to church once a week, by the by, but I should confess this at this point. I go to a church, to be honest. It's a very it's a very kind of, you know, it's a slightly offbeat church. What actually happens is that I'm in a community choir, and we use this church as our practice, our rehearsal space, right? And we just have to put up with the fact that there are certain rather churchy things on the wall because it is a church or whatever. So the last few weeks, you know, I go up there every Thursday to sort of sing various Joni Mitchell songs and things like that, which you do not want me to get into here. And there's a lovely improving poster on the wall, I think for the Sunday school there, and it's got the word Jesus at the top and a cross, you know, this one little symbol. And then underneath there's some pretty picture and it says unconditional love. And I thought, it doesn't get much more conditional than in the Christian story. You think about the Christian story. How conditional does it have to get? You know, the love is conditional on you passing this test of faith, and if you don't, you're going to be tortured. How long for? How long's my sentence? Oh, well, actually, all eternity. I mean, it's very difficult to kind of construe or think of a love that's more conditional than that. It's extraordinary. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to work in the little offensive anecdote as I missed out last night. Might reinforce your belief that I wrote that book because I want to overthrow world religion, but I really don't. I don't care. Yeah, the mind cannot handle unconditional love, and the more we try, the more tense life tends to get.
When you had this, I have to say these words, you and seeing there is no self, was that like a shock for you?
Yeah. Well, it wasn't a shock for me, no.
No, but it was a shock. It was a... But
what the hell?
And there was nothing before that was...
Yeah, there was a desperate seeking. Yeah. There was a kind of, oh look, and now we're going to get a technique and a path. No, we're not. There may be nothing at all before, there may absolutely nothing, but here, as you know, I was a kind of pretty sort of passionate seeker. And there was sort of real, I mean, I'd long before that given up any path, any thought of a path. But there was a more and more kind of intense kind of looking like, what the hell are these people talking about? There is something here from what they're saying, there's something here which is utterly, utterly, utterly obvious, and yet I can't see it. What the hell is going on? So there was this really intense kind of almost trying to, like this is a sort of screen, perception and reality is as a sort of screen, and there must be something just behind it, if only I could. So there's a huge sense of frustration.
You were listening to Tony before.
I was listening to Tony, I was reading stuff, I was listening to other people, There weren't many speakers in London in those days. Now we're 10 a penny, but in those days there weren't. But such as there were, I went to them, and it's like, what the hell are they talking about? This frustration,
And so one cannot say it's like a recognition of any kind. It's not like, no.
Yeah, it is in a way, it's not like a recognition of like something remembered, but it's like a sudden shock of, that's what this is. Yeah, in a way. But as I say, that first recognition is often incomplete, but it doesn't feel incomplete. For the one who is seeing there isn't a one who's seeing it, pardon the language, but for the one who is seeing, in the seeing of emptiness, it can then very much be felt, that's complete, that's it. And then the I comes back, and it's like, I have somehow got to get back to that. And then there's more frustration, because there's also the recognition, but I can't get back to that. All I can do is wait helplessly, hoping that that will come back. Mm-hmm. And it can't be known that that's incomplete, because it can't be known that everything is also full of unconditional love until it's seen. I mean, I'm sorry about the tautology, it's just the most obvious thing, you know, it cannot be seen that this is emptiness and fullness until it's seen. It can't be seen that there is unconditional love until it's seen. Yeah. So, for a lot of individuals, there can be a period of intense frustration and despair once there's been a glimpse of this. Yeah. And as I've often said, frustration and despair isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world. Hope can be far worse than despair.
So we can possibly get a glimpse of it and fall back to
we
separated.
That's pretty common, that there can be a
So I
glimpse.
still feel like the donkey with the carrot in front of my mouth.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And it's awful because there is no carrot. Yeah. Just like everything else, the carrot doesn't really exist.
So I eat donkey salami.
Yeah, that's it. That's the way to go. Turn the donkey into salami. Eat the donkey. Eat the donkey of hope. And then focus on the carrot of despair. Oh, if only there was a path, it would be the path. No. In a way, it's kind of obvious how, you know, despair doesn't sound great to the mind, but it's okay. It can be a relief, despair can. Despair comes when there's the recognition that this real recognition on a very deep level, that this really cannot do anything about its predicament. Whatever that predicament feels like. But if you've been a passionate seeker, as it's obvious that I was, you know, that can be a real, not just a relief, but also a release from trying. So, as I've often said before, despair can be quite relaxing, and as I reminded us last night, relaxation is the key to Buddhahood here and now.
When you talk, it all just clicks in totally. And there's also this thing that there's a kind of still a veil of, like you said, that if you could just let this veil fall, or some, like you said, this what am I missing, or what's behind the veil, or what is this veil, or knowing there's nothing you can do about it, but everything clicks.
Yeah.
It's just absolutely yes, and absolute yes, and yet maybe not, I don't know, but this veil of still seeking, still questioning, still looking.
Yeah.
From this perspective of I at, and yet 100% absolute yes, everything you're saying. I can't imagine anything else. That's so weird. It's like I can't imagine anything else than what you're saying. And yet the doubt or something comes in as a veil to say nothing really, but a veil.
Yeah.
Not even a word for it anymore.
I think there's a good reason that image of a veil has been used throughout history in descriptions, because it does feel like, I mean, I can remember sitting in Buckland Hall on retreats with Tony and just sort of, you know, just looking past him through the window, and the mountains, the trees, whatever you could see out there. And it just seemed like so evanescent, like painted on a veil, so thin, just like that.
Yeah.
So unreal.
Yeah.
And yet,
Yeah.
I couldn't see past it, which
Yeah.
is the point. I
Yeah.
couldn't see
Yeah,
past it.
exactly.
Yeah.
And everything
Frustration.
looks like a painting
Yeah.
or unreal, and yet the importance of it, or the tenacity or something
Tenacity,
of making it important, or of making it something purposeful or real, in the sense of this is real, and this I, me,
Yeah.
and yet everything beyond, everything you say, to me that's it. I wouldn't doubt any of it.
Yeah. Another thing that can suddenly drop into place if this is seen even for a second is a lot of what I call them mystical statements that we might have read. I mean, certain Zen statements come to my mind and think, what the hell do they mean by that? And then sudden, oh, yeah, of course. You know, mountains are no longer mountains. First mountains are mountains, then they're no longer mountains. But of course, then they're mountains again. Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah. And then shortly after that, we could be seen trundling a cart up to the charity bookshop with all our spiritual and Zen books in them.
Do you ever feel like there's a dropping away of psychological stuff as time goes on, or a clearing, or?
Yeah, all of that can happen. Yeah, I don't think there's any rules, and I think, how shall I put it? Different systems, different psychophysical systems have different levels of neurosis. So let's talk in terms of like, there's a person, and then bang, maybe the person's gone. Right, but that psychophysical system that the person represented might have been intensely neurotic, or they might have had very little neurosis, they might have done a lot of work, in conventional psychotherapy in terms of their neurosis already, or they might not have done. And so anything can happen, there aren't any rules. So, yeah, of course, you could say, well, any phenomena can continue to arise, and if we're talking in terms of neuroses, psychological quirks, that kind of thing, of course, that could continue to arise. I'd say there is a tendency, no rules at all, but I'd say there is a tendency that in even the initial seeing, in a split second, probably a tendency for quite a lot of, I'm going to call it neurotic energy, very loosely. Don't sort of challenge me about that, it's just I can't think of a better phrase. Well, challenge me about it if you like. But I think there's a tendency for quite a lot of neurotic energy to dissipate, particularly when this is seen in its entirety. Once Nisargadatta's had his say and everything, there's been the seeing of everything. And so that does tend to blow apart often quite a lot of neurotic energy, so there's likely to be quite a lot of change on that level. But yeah, of course, neurosis can still arise and go on arising, and I notice, other people notice, it's pretty damned obvious that if we want to be a teacher, if we want to be a spiritual teacher or a guru in that way, and we want to kind of make a story out of that and gather people to us so that we can work on that. It's perfectly possible to do that. So there'll be plenty of people that talk about this out there who will quite possibly disagree with and decry what I am saying. Say, well, of course, yes, but when this seeing is well, that's just the start of it, and there's lots more work to be done. Well, if we if there's a kind of mental and psychophysical system that's attracted to that idea, then maybe we'll do that. Neurosis arises or it doesn't. Just, life happens, life goes on happening until it stops happening. Yeah. So, I can't remember the question now, but I hope that was vaguely an answer. Yeah.
Has it affected your attachments at all?
Yeah, definitely. And again, I think this is something very common. One of the things, I think one of the most common characteristics, if you talk to individuals where, let's say that, the Nisargadatta recipe's been completed. That is a daft way of putting it, but never mind. So if you talk to individuals where it's pretty obvious that nothing's been seen and everything's been seen, one of the most common things I think you'll hear people say, I mean, believe me, to the mind, this can sound really bad, but it is not generally how this is reported as an experience, is that there can be a profound loss of interest in doing so much stuff. So there is a tendency for life to become simpler and quieter. There are no rules, but if you had to place a bet on a tendency to happen, the wise bet would be, well, the tendency will be that life will become simpler and quieter because there'll be less impulse to do stuff, to fill time. Once it's seen that time does not exist, there's much less of an impulse to need to fill it by doing lots of stuff. Now, I don't know whether you can see the connection, but I will make a connection with what I'm saying now and what you just said, which is, a distinct dropping of attachment. Not in any kind of anything that I would call an airy-fairy or a spiritual way, or not in any way that we have, let us work to become less attached because that would be a holy thing to do. Not at all, it's just completely natural. But because this in its simplicity seems so rich, I'll take the word seems out of that and say is so rich, there's just naturally, very often, just much less of a need to fill up the empty space of my existential existence. Mm-hmm. So, maybe if I'm a member of a darts team, I'll go on being a member of a darts team. Maybe, I like the camaraderie and the bonhomie and drinking with my mates on a Friday night. That's quite possible, but it's quite possible also that there will be a huge collapse in investment in all sorts of things. To me, that is intimately connected with loss of attachment.
But not surrendering your attachment. Not surrendering.
Well, it's far better, of course, if we could consciously surrender our attachment, because then we will get a lot more brownie points from God in his heaven, or her heaven. I think it's a lovely, holy idea, isn't it, that we need to surrender our attachment. It's like the mind loves that. The mind wants some noble, heroic path. Yeah. Non-attachment. Oh, isn't that wonderful? I will work on it. In fact, today I have just weighed my attachments and I am 3% less attached than I was last week. It's lovely. It's wonderful. No, of course not. Forget that. It's just the kind of natural thing that, as long as there's this embodied sense of separation, and there's time and purpose and meaning and, life has to be lived, and that is very attaching. The Buddhists again have wonderful metaphors for this, chains being attached to my ankles. And it doesn't matter whether those are chains of iron or chains of gold. It doesn't matter if you like thinking in terms of, karma. It doesn't matter whether it's bad karma or good karma. It's still attachment. And I go through life dragging these chains of iron or chains of gold, or most of us some of each or whatever. And it's just like they just kind of naturally tend to fall off when this is seen, because there's no person for them to be attached to anymore. So it's not a question of dismantling the chains, it's a question of the leg that they're apparently attached to disappearing. I'm sorry, that is probably one of the worst metaphors I've ever used, but yeah. So I would say, without any kind of holy intent whatsoever, and no moralistic meaning whatsoever, it's just natural for the kind of passionate intensity with which the person invests themselves in certain things. And it could be the dance club, it could be that. It's just natural for that to lessen or fall away, so that there tends to be a simpler life. Yeah. And you hear this over and over and over again. I mean, I do communicate quite a lot with individuals where this is kind of pretty clearly been seen, and that is a very common thread going through what they say, you know. I don't know what's happened, I just know that, you know, I feel much less motivation to go out there and do lots of things. I mean, you know, this ain't great if you're ambitious.
If you say that now that when you see it, then you tend to have quite a life and everything, and you don't feel that you have so many impulses to do things. Can you describe what are your reasons to be here?
No, because I don't have any reasons to be here. I mean, I could give the kind of, you know, the sort of conventional non-dual answer to that, which is, well, I'm not here. You know, this is oneness speaking to oneness, and I'm not here. And I mean, I'm quite happy to say that, but I'll answer the question a little bit more in the terms, I think, in which you're asking, which no, I can't. No, I mean, it's just what happens. It's just what happens next. You know, an invitation is made, and there is nothing here that comes up that says no to that. If there was something up in here,
there is something that makes you say, "Yeah, I would like to."
Not really.
I'm
no.
Talking
Not even that.
in terms of personality and I and all that stuff.
Well, I have the character of a speaker. That's obvious. I mean, I've always, when I had to earn a living, it was through speaking. I was a lecturer, you know. So it's kind of this character likes talking to people. That's obvious. No, you know, an invitation is made, and there's nothing in here that says no to that, and there's something in here that, I don't know, might think, oh, that could be kind of fun. I'll get to eat cheesecake and drink coffee and maybe meet some nice people. And so this says yes, but no, you can't. I feel in a sense, I feel like there's a kind of frustration in giving an answer like this and a frustration in hearing an answer like this, but it actually is not. It's just an attempt to describe an experience. You know, it's like, why did I write this awful iconoclastic book that we were talking about last night? Well, no reason I didn't write it. It wrote itself. And if you want a kind of reason that makes sense in conventional terms, all I could say is, well, I kind of enjoyed it. So, we can't answer these questions in conventional terms and have them make sense.
Yeah, I'm somehow trying to, when I see that I have so much conditioning in my brain, then I can say, okay, I did this because I have these ideas there, and they made me behave this or this other way. And then since I think, okay, all this conditioning is gone, I see that there is no self, then my mind still needs to find a reason in the direction of love or helping the others, of course. And this is a reason in this direction. So
the mind, which doesn't exist, is kind of still clinging on to that kind of reasoning, which is fine. It's okay.
But how does this connect with Buddha that wanted that people don't suffer? So somehow goes to the people and tries to tell them, look, you suffer because of this or this. So this impulse was more or less, the very beginning of that was like somehow love or...
Yeah. I didn't get quite all of the last phrase there. I got the word love, but what was the phrase around it?
When Buddha tries to alleviate the suffer of everybody, giving his teaching, and the reason for that is somehow love. Or So I could expect that you say also love when you come here.
Sorry to disappoint you. It's a lovely story, isn't it? I've got no idea what the Buddha actually said. I don't think anybody has. It's a lovely story, isn't it? And we notice that in the way of the mind, you know, that Buddhists have been fighting with each other about the best way to do that in the story of time for the last 2,500 years. They've also been fighting passionately with each other about what the hell the Buddha meant. I mean, nothing, I mean, the central, at the centre of Buddhism is at the centre of what we're talking about is no self. And Buddhists have been fighting with each other for 2,500 years about what the Buddha meant by that. That's just the nature of the mind. But no, I'd love to say I've come here out of an overwhelming sense of love and duty to humanity, but I say if you like, but it's not true. Come here for cheesecake and because it's nice meeting nice people. I'm not going to put those in any order of priority, by the way. The cheesecake or the nice people.
Where's the cake?
We have the coffee break now.
There you go. Talking of cheesecake and nice people.
No cheesecake.
Yeah.
No cheesecake, but nice little coffee sweets. And in the basement again.
By the way, is the camera still running? Because I'm only going to say this if it's still running. I would say, probably by and large, if you come across somebody who is motivated, thinks they're motivated by a desire to save humanity, I'd get away from them as fast as possible. If that sounds a mystery to you, we can talk about that after coffee and cookies, if you like. But really, anyway, we can switch the camera off now.
Red button.
Red button.